Today, we're addressing the Tray Hoover criminals, the Tiny Raskals, the Tray Sojas. Established in the early 1970s and quickly earning and maintaining their deadly reputation and respect in the streets, this faction of the Hoovers is one of the most active in Los Angeles and are known for being one of the most deadly, scandalous, and ruthless gangs in the area. From known murder robberies around the city, internal beefs and assassinations, intense gang wars with multiple gangs, and a lot of other insane situations, this gang definitely has a story to tell. But before we get into all that, let me get a like and subscribe if you're not a mark. Yeah. All right. Welcome to Cali's Most Dangerous. Let's get into it. On March 5th, 2014, Desmond McMiller put his belongings to Mikia Bailey's gold Mercury Grand Marquis and drove the car from his home in Las Vegas to Los Angeles, California. The following morning, around 10:30 a.m., Douglas Woolley was walking across 97th Street on the west side of Main Street in Los Angeles, California. As he crossed, a gold Mercury Grand Marquis crossed Main Street on 97th and stopped where Woolley had crossed. Two known Tray Hoover criminals belonging to the Jump Out Boys or JLB clique, McMiller and Patrick Pearson, emerged from the passenger seat of the Grand Marquis, quickly approached Woolley, and he fired several shots at him, taking his life in the process. Among other injuries, Woolley suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, 2 to the torso, several to the upper extremities, and 1 to the buttocks. The totality of all the injuries led to Woolley's death, probably within minutes of the shooting. At the crime scene, investigators recovered 15 spent casings fired from 2 separate guns. 4 of the casings were fired from a gun that used .40 caliber ammunition. The remaining 11 were consistent with ammunition fired from an AK-47 assault rifle. Woolley, he allegedly didn't belong to any gang and had no affiliation in any gang as well. He was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. The Hoover criminals have been engaged in a gang war with the Main Street Crips since around 2009. On the morning of March 7, 2014, McMiller spoke to Erica Washington about the murder. McMiller told Washington that he and Pearson went to Main Street Crips gang territory in Bailey's Grand Marquis. McMiller told Washington that the shooting was in retaliation for the shooting of another Hoover criminal that happened around March 6. In the end, the jury found the Tray Hoover criminals guilty of all count, and the trial court sentenced Pearson to 75 years to life and McMiller to 161 years to life in prison. Yeah, rest in peace to Woolley. He was definitely caught in the middle of a deadly war between the Hoovers and the Main Street Crips. But trust, that's just one story of the Tray Hoover criminals' ruthless ways. Being one of the first members of the Hoover faction, this gang has a long history of brutality and violent means of operation in the city of Los Angeles. Yeah, gang wars with damn near every Crip factions, insane drug operations, and even some internal assassinations. This gang has all that and much more in their timeline. We're going to address it all. But first, let's get into the danger rating of the Tray Hoover criminals. The Tray Hoover criminals, they're going to receive a danger rating of a 9.7 out of 10. Based off of the gang's shown brutality over the years. This gang is known for being one of the most cutthroat in Los Angeles, which is one of the main reasons why they're so hated. But these notorious ways, they're not just limited to their ops. Shit, even their own members have fell victim to the gang. Man, for pretty much every story we're going to address, even a few that I can't even mention because how graphic they are, it's always other Hoover members who are more than willing to snitch on a fellow gang member to avoid or reduce prison time. And I don't think it gets more scandalous than that. But then again, we're talking about the Tray Hoovers. Matter of fact, while we're on danger rating, I made a mistake in my 5 Dudes Hoover Gangsta Crip video. Chester Dwayne Turner was actually from Tray Hoover criminals. Between the years of 1986 and 1996, the bodies of 8 women were found in the Figueroa area of Los Angeles, an area known for its crime, including prostitution and narcotics activities. Chester Dwayne Turner, a known Tray Hoover, lived at various addresses local to the bodies during this period.
But what he took from our family can never be replaced. Never. You know, he tried to destroy our family, but he needs to know he didn't destroy anything. He made us stronger.
That's a family member of one of the victims who was killed by 47-year-old Chester D. Turner, one of the most prolific killers in Los Angeles history. Turner is just one of the 3 men responsible for brutally murdering multiple women in the 80s and 90s. More than 100 women in South Los Angeles were killed during that time. Police point to highly addictive crack that caused many women to turn to prostitution and other crimes to support their addiction. Turner and the other 2 men reportedly targeted these women. He was already on death row for murdering 10 women, but Friday, Turner was given an additional life sentence for 4 more murders.
All of the bodies have been sexually assaulted and strangled to death, sometimes by wire and sometimes manually. All had a history of drug abuse, and all but one had cocaine in their systems. Yeah, exactly. Scandalous. Would y'all went lower or higher though? And give me some reasons on why. Y'all got any crazy stories about these guys? Any close calls? Also, let me know about that in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. Anyways, that's just a few situations that justify the rating. Let's get into some more insane stories that include internal killings and gang hits as we continue to address the Tray Hoover criminals. James Williams, Michael Cozy, and Trayvon Lark were all members of the Tray Hoover criminal gang. In the early hours of August 29th, 2015, the group attended a party at a marijuana dispensary in Los Angeles. Also present was Hoover gang member Demaria Gilbert. At the party, Lark accused Robert Brown, a younger member of the set, of not putting in work or not killing enemies. After a brief exchange, Brown and Vontaaay Daquan Darden left the party and returned with guns. After the return, Brown, Darden, Lark, Williams, and Kazi gunned to 3 cars and drove out to kill rival gang members. Brown and Darden got into a black Mercedes. Kazi and an unidentified man occupied another car, and Williams and Lark occupied a third. Brown and Darden, they had handguns, and Lark, he had an M16 rifle. Williams did not have a gun, however, and it was unclear whether Brown or Darden knew Williams and Lark were joining. The 3 cars, they drove to 104th and Broadway, at which point, after spotting a car containing Lark and Williams, Brown and Darden opened fire, drilling the car with bullets and hitting Lark in the chest. Williams, he drove back to the dispensary, where we began performing CPR on Lark. Unfortunately though, Lark died a short time later. When Gilbert, who had witnessed the scene outside the dispensary, returned inside, he saw Brown and Darden's handguns on the floor and placed them on a shelf. He did not know if Brown and Darden had returned to the dispensary yet. Police detained Gilbert in May of 2016 for reasons unrelated to this case. When detained, Gilbert told officers he had information about Lark's shooting and later gave a recorded statement to Los Angeles Police Department Detective Matthew Courtney. Gilbert told Courtney about the events before and after the shooting and described Brown and Darden leaving the party before the shooting in a white Mercedes. Officers released Gilbert shortly after he gave his statement. Still, in September, police arrested Gilbert in connection with the shooting. Gilbert then gave another recorded statement, hoping his cooperation would lead to his release. Instead, Gilbert remained in custody and was charged with being an accessory after the fact to Lark's murder. In June of 2017, as a part of an ongoing plea discussion, Gilbert, he provided recorded proof or statements to the prosecutors. He described events before and after the shooting in a manner generally consistent with the prior statements. Gilbert relayed his impression that Clark was just playing with Brown when Lark accused Brown of not putting in work. But Brown took the comment seriously because he was so high. Also, he claimed for the first time in the case that Kazi went out first to scout for rival gang members before the group embarked on a shooting mission. He also suggested that Brown and Darden drove in a black Mercedes, contrary to his initial statement. Gilbert then proceeded to describe events occurring in the period following the shooting. According to Gilbert, the day after the shooting, he attended a meeting intended to allow Bates to explain his actions. Bates stated that he had been a driver and didn't know that they were going to shoot. A few months after the shooting, Gilbert heard Brown tell Williams he shot him on accident and didn't know who he was. Ultimately, the jury found Brown and Darden guilty as charged. However, the jury completely acquitted Williams and Kazi. The trial court sentenced Brown and Darden to a total of 80 years in life. Look, y'all gotta help me figure this out. Y'all think he was set up in retaliation for the words exchanged between the 2 Hoover members? or simply a case of mistaken identity? Y'all let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. But anyways, we're definitely about to get into some more stories that get way more crazy than it is. But first, let's get into who these guys are. Who are the H.A. Hoover criminals? The Westside H.A. Hoover criminal gang, also known as the H.A. Hoovers, and formerly known as the H.A. Hoover Crips, are a large and infamous African-American street gang found on the west side of South Central Los Angeles, California. Sometimes referred to as the Tiny Raskals, Tray Sojas, and the Young Threats. When it comes to races, they're predominantly an African-American gang, but the H.A. Hoovers are known to put on a lot of other races.
Hey man, show all the white boys from different hoods on West Side Hoover, all white boys up to Park. Look at bro on Hoover. You hear me?
He's saying our white boy up to Park, bro. That's
our white boy up to Park. Dead homie.
They have a large number of reputable Mexicans from the set and some Asians as well. You just can't be no bitch. Yeah, with the H.A. Hoovers, it's wartime every day. They always ready to spray. So just watch what you say. When it comes to the H.A. Hoovers affiliations, this gang is a part of the Hoover card. And even though this faction of Hoovers are no longer a part of the Gangsta Crip card, which we'll go over later, this gang also associates themselves with members of the Trays. When it comes to size and numbers of the H.A. Hoovers, they're considered the largest and most active subset under the Hoover criminals umbrella. When it comes to the gang's area, the territory stretches from 80th Street in the north to approximately Manchester Avenue in the south, between Vermont Avenue in the west and Figueroa Street to the east. Yeah, you can drive down Figueroa Street. Just don't slow down if you're hot. You're liable to get put to sleep. From the 1970s, even up to today, this area is known for its insane activities. Yeah, shootouts, pimps and prostitution, and a lot of other crazy shit. These streets are known to leave a lot of people avoiding the area as the only solution. LAPD's Southeast Division, for instance, had to patrol 10 square miles containing 66 gangs, which averaged about 144 homicides per year in the late 1980s and early 1990s.
The 77th is an incredibly violent place. Over 150 people murdered in the last year. That's a 200% increase in the past 20 years. In 1993, 3,000 robberies, 4,000 assaults, and the cops blame most of the violence on gangs.
Crash 31, go. No weapon. Just a 9mm handgun.
When gang violence was at its peak in South Central, with a lot of the activities coming from the Hoovers. But the H.A. Hoovers, like already mentioned, they're considered to be the most active and the largest in the 77th Division of the LAPD's area.
Not as if the 77th doesn't have enough problems.
I got two of the suspects. They're going to be in a 5-9 place.
More violent crimes are committed in this 12 square mile area than any other division in LA.
It's like about a 9mm from the size of the holes on them.
How many people are talking?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
40 kills, Smith & Wesson.
Hey, buddy, stay with us. Talk to me. What's your name?
This could turn into a homicide.
Like already mentioned, they're part of the larger Hoover umbrella, so they're naturally allies with all the Hoovers. Because of their geographical proximity to each other, the Hoovers also find themselves in close alliance with the barrio 18th Street cliques, the Hoover Locos. Both gangs peacefully coexist with each other and share most of the same enemies. In addition, they're clicked up with their closest geographical allies, the 74 Hoover criminals, and form the 4 Tray Hoovers. And like all Hoover factions, they have very few allies, but a lot of enemies. Despite their long list of enemies though, the Hoover criminals dominate their neighborhood through sheer numbers and their reputation for brutality and terror. And unfortunately, it's alleged that rapper Pop Smoke fell victim to their brutality.
A rising rap star shot to death before sunrise in a Hollywood Hills home. Police say 20-year-old Bashar Jackson, who went by Pop Smoke, was gunned down when several suspects broke in to rob him. Just hours before the home invasion, fans say Pop Smoke was flaunting stacks of money inside his home on social media.
His address is right there on one of his shopping bags in his house, which is this same location.
Bashir Baraka Jackson, also known as Pop Smoke, was an American rapper, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York City. He began his career in late 2018 with a single, NPR, but he rose to fame and prominence with his breakout singles, Welcome to the Party and Dior in 2019. Unfortunately, due to his untimely passing, his rise came to a tragic ending. On February 19th, 2020, Pop Smoke was renting a house owned by Real Housewives star Teddy Mellencamp in the Hollywood Hills area of California. Pop Smoke, he spent the night turned up with his entourage and a couple females. And at the end of the night, it seemed like it was coming to an end. Everyone was settled in, getting ready to call it a night. But around 4:30 a.m., 5 hooded men, including one wearing a ski mask and carrying a handgun, broke into the house through a second-story balcony while Pop Smoke was taking a shower. And then shortly thereafter, the woman heard 3 shots after an altercation with Pop Smoke. LAPD, they received news of a home invasion from a call from the East Coast and arrived at the home about 6 minutes later to find Pop Smoke with multiple gun wounds. He was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors performed surgery on the left side of his chest. But unfortunately, a few hours later, he was pronounced dead. The LAPD at first suspected that Jackson's death was gang-related, as he was tied to the Crips. However, LAPD later believed his death was a consequence of a home robbery gone wrong. It was believed that intruders stole Jackson's watch and other jewelry before running away from the house. The day before his murder, Jackson and his friend Michael Daradola posted several images on social media, including one in which Mellencamp's home address can be seen on the background. The rapper also posted a story on Instagram and Facebook of gifts he had received. One showed the house's full address on the packaging, giving out his location. On July 9th, 2020, 3 adult men and 2 minors were arrested for the murder of the rapper. One of the adult suspects had been charged with the murder with a special circumstance that alleged that the killings were committed during the commission of a robbery and burglary. Another was charged with the attempted murder. The 2 juveniles were charged with murder and robbery. After about a year after their arrest, in May of 2021, a 15-year-old, the youngest of the 4 intruders, allegedly admitted to killing Jackson over a diamond-studded Rolex during a recorded interview with a cellmate at a juvenile detention center. The 15-year-old told the cellmate that Jackson at first complied with the request for jury, but then tried to fight him. And after a confrontation broke out, Jackson was pistol whipped and shot with a Beretta M92. The intruders met off with his Rolex, which was sold for only $2,000. Now, in their defense, all this shit is alleged. So once everything gets rolling with the trial, we'll have a better idea of what played out. Either way, rest in peace. Bruh, this shit is insane. Unfortunately, Pop Smoke didn't know how ruthless this gang is. In these ways, they trace back way to the gang's foundation. The Hoover criminals became one of the most notorious street gangs to partake in the drug trade in Los Angeles County. The infamous drug lord, Freeway Ricky Ross, was believed to be affiliated with the Hoover criminals. Because of this, pretty much all factions of the Hoovers had an influx of guns, drugs, and a lot of money. And trust, these guys were dropping shit left and right. Because back then, or even today, the Hoovers are known for a lot more than fights. The Hoovers are one of the most feared and hated gangs in South Central. They have a brutal reputation involving gang violence, which made them prime suspects in gang-related shootings, and were accused of many shootings throughout the area. And because of their ruthless means of operation, and willing to go to war with anybody who wasn't Hoovers, the Hoovers were into bitter rivalries with multiple Crip gangs in the late 1980s. But if you guys watched the Fight Who's Hoover video, you guys know that the Hoovers are widely known for being ruthless in prison just as much as the streets, and the Tray Hoovers are no exception to this at all. Matter of fact, a situation played out with the Hoover member, Lonnie D. Perkins. Perkins was already serving a lot of time and had prior strike convictions for robbery and 3 other convictions, which included attempted escape from jail, prisoner in possession of a weapon, and possession of marijuana for sale. In July 2020, Perkins was an inmate at the California Correctional Institute in Calipatria. The prison houses its inmates in 3 sections, designated Sections A, Section B, and Section C. Perkins was housed with Donnie Lewis in Section A, Cell 107. Stephen Cato Brown was also an inmate at the prison. He had a blood clot and a long history of migraine headaches. Because of this, he couldn't stand the sound of noise of people walking by his cell and would often shout and scream out the door when people walked by. Brown's cellmate was Anthony Herford. They had been cellmates for about 9 months. Herford looked after Brown and tried to make sure he took his medication so he could sleep at night. Brown and Herford, they were housed in Section B, Cell 200, in the upper levels. Perkins was a member of the Tray Hoover criminals gang. Orange is the signature color for that gang, and in his cell in prison, Perkins had pictures with orange borders and a piece of orange cloth with the letter H standing for Hoovers on it. In an evening of July 10th of 2000, Perkins walked by Brown and Herford's cell and hollered at Herford. In reaction, Brown went off, and Brown and Perkins, they started arguing. When the argument ended, Perkins walked away, and Herford told Brown that he was stupid for arguing with people in prison. Herford had trouble sleeping at night because he was concerned about the incident. The next morning, on July 11th, Herford went to Perkins' cell and apologized for Brown's action the night before. He explained that Perkins had a blood clot and goes off on a lot of people. Herford told Perkins that Brown acted that way with everybody near Tier and he meant no harm. Later that morning, Officer Enrique Valencia was on duty in a control booth for the building. As a control booth officer, Officer Valencia opened and closed the cell doors. Officer Aguirre and Romero were the floor officers. Blind spots in the building made it difficult for the officers to see towards the back, behind and underneath the stairwells, the areas near the counselors and CO's officers, and the wall where the televisions and telephones were located. Officer Valencia received a telephone call from Herford at about 8 a.m. that morning. He knew Herford and recognized his voice. Herford told Officer Valencia that he could no longer deal with Brown's problem, and he was concerned about Brown's welfare. He informed Officer Valencia that there had been an arguing match the night before between Brown and Perkins, Lewis, and another inmate named Hyder. Herford spoke to Officer Valencia in a very low tone, and his voice was quiet, secretive, and concerned. During this conversation, Hoover said nothing about wanting a new cellmate. At around 8 a.m., Officer Valencia observed Perkins walking toward his cell. Perkins picked up a water bottle and showed it to the officer, who acknowledged the gesture. Officer Aguirre was on duty in the Alpha Yard, providing additional coverage from prisoners moving through the yard to and from breakfast in the dining hall. He was standing near the podium of the housing unit. The podium is a desk that is directly in front of the sally port. At around 8:06, Officer Aguirre heard Brown shout, "Officer! Officer!" Officer Aguirre then turned and saw Brown, draped in blood in his right side. Brown had been stabbed near the water fountain, and a trail of blood went from the fountain to the front of the counselor desk where Brown collapsed. Officer took a shirt from a nearby laundry bin and applied pressure to Brown's wound. But Brown was still breathing profusely and did not talk to the officer. Officer Aguirre locked down the building by yelling at all the inmates in a loud voice to get down. When such an order is given, the inmates are supposed to immediately get down. Officer Aguirre also yelled to Officer Valencia to set off his personal alarm, which will notify staff outside the building. Officer Valencia in the control booth moved to a corner window of Section A. He saw that Brown had a wound to the neck. He also saw Perkins and Hyder in that same area. Officer Valencia saw no other inmates in the Section A area. Officer Aguirre observed Perkins and Lewis moving away from the area with another person. They did not get down immediately as ordered. Officer Aguirre saw no other inmates in the area, and he saw no one going up to the stairwell. Nor did he see inmate Williams in the area. A water bottle, what appeared to be bloodstains, was found at the water fountain near Brown after the stabbing. Officer Aguirre also found 2 inmate manufactured weapons in the area where Brown had collapsed for help. One of the weapons was in a cart underneath the television. Brown was the inmate who was closest to the cart. This weapon had a bent plastic handle that was orange, black, and white. The color of the handle was mostly orange. The weapon was sharpened at 2 edges that formed a point at the end. Most inmate manufactured weapons have handles of electrical tape, pieces of cloth, or masking tape. Another inmate manufactured weapon was also recovered. This weapon, which was not bent, also had an orange plastic handle. Brown had suffered stab wounds to the right side of his neck and upper side of his left arm, and 3 stab wounds to his back. The stab wounds to his neck and back were fatal. After the incident, Lewis was handcuffed and patted down. He had blood stains on the front of his shirt and on his hand. Blood was also found on the outer seam of Perkins' shorts. In addition, blood was found on Lewis's clothing and on one of his shoes. The blood was Brown's, with the exception of the blood found on Lewis's shorts, which was a combination of Perkins' blood and Brown's blood. In the end, due to forensic evidence and Perkins' statements from the officers, Perkins was sentenced to additional prison time, which was a term of 25 years to life, tripled under the 3-strike laws to 75 years to life, plus 3 consecutive 1-year terms for each of the 3 non-strike convictions, for a total sentence of 78 years in prison. Yeah, if you're a Hoover, you don't mind doing more time. That's just the price you pay for being on the front line. This situation occurred in 2000, but in order to address some more stories, we have to address the history of the Tray Hoovers. Before we get into the history of the Hoovers, it's essential that we go over some history of the overall Hoover umbrella. This fashion is a collection of several different street gangs along Hoover Avenue in the city of Los Angeles, California. The original Hoovers, they were formed around 92nd and Hoover Avenue, around 1969 or 70, and they were also known as the Hoover Groovers back then. And the Hoover Groovers have been around long before the formation of the Crips. They're a collection of various neighborhoods who socialized on 92nd Street when the Crips were in infancy stages. When the Westside Crips formed an area around St. Andrews Park, they functioned with the Hoovers, and eventually the Hoovers came under the Crips umbrella as the Crips philosophy spread throughout Los Angeles. When specific neighborhood identities began, the Hoover Groovers became the Hoover Crips. The H.A. Hoovers came around 1973. Eventually, several other Hoover Crips formed from 43rd Street in South Central Los Angeles to 112th. The H.A. Hoovers were formed around 1973, making them one of the older Hoover factions. Plus, by the mid-1980s, the H.A. Hoovers had over 1,000 members in the streets of South Central Los Angeles, and the membership kept growing. Also, the Hoovers were one of the most fit in the area. Their bitter reputation for gun violence made them one of the first suspects to be blamed for gang-related shootings. And by the late 1980s, the Hoover criminals were engaged in several robberies with several Bloods and Crips. Yeah, the H.A. Hoovers have a long history in Los Angeles, with ties with some of the biggest names and headlines in the streets as far as gangs go. Throughout the years, the Hoovers have moved with one of the most militant and ruthless means of operation in the city of Los Angeles. Because of this, they went to war with everybody they were surrounded by, and even gangs who didn't reside by them, including the Eastside Crips. Raymond Washington was one of the founders of the Eastside Crips gang, and the founder of the Crips in general. Unfortunately, he was murdered in a drive-by shooting in August of 1979. Rumors were spread around the city that the shooters who shot and killed Washington were believed to be part of the Hoover Crips. The Eastside Crips pinned the shooting on the Hoover criminals and held them responsible for the murder of Raymond Washington. This sparked a feud between the two gangs, leading up to a start of war between the Hoover Crips and the Eastside Crips, today known as the East Coast Crips. Throughout the 1980s, this gang developed a reputation for being one of the most violent gangs, willing to go to war with everybody, including the Crips, which was still a new occurrence at the time. As a result, in around 1994, the Hoovers dropped the Crip moniker and decided to replace it with the Criminals, excluding the five dudes Hoover against the Crips. This change, it was inspired by the many rivalries they had with Crips. Because of this, the H.A. Hoovers have a long history of rivals. Rivals of the H.A. Hoover criminals.
This is why they be shooting at the Mexicans in the set. This is exactly why. Goob got an orange rag on, walking. Like, bro, you're not from the set, Goob. He tripping. Look at him. Big orange rag on Hoover, and he walking with it.
Just like most umbrellas and cars in Los Angeles, the Hoover umbrella is known to stick together on whatever issues are brought upon by other gang members. Basically meaning, if you have beef with one Hoover faction, you pretty much got smoke with all of them. This means these niggas pretty much go at it with gangs from 51st Street all the way up to 112th Street. And if you know Los Angeles, that's a big stretch with multiple gangs right next to each other. So they're at it with a lot of gangs, including all sections of the Main Street Crips, which we'll get into later, but also a couple of Hispanic gangs like South Los. Matter of fact, in 2012, a crazy situation played out between the two gangs. On October 10th of 2012, at around 7 p.m., Daryl N. and Benicia J., both juveniles at the time, were shot by Jonathan Darrell Powell. Darrell, an African-American male, was a member of the predominantly Hispanic gang, South Los. A fellow gang member, Darrell's homie, was Benicia's boyfriend. At around 6 p.m., Darrell was tagging or spray painting the street in front of Benicia's house when he was approached by 5 people, including Powell. Powell was a known member of the H.A. Hoover criminals. Powell asked Darrell which gang he belonged to, and Darrell replied, "I'm from South Los." Right after that, an argument ensued, and the two parties began insulting each other. That's when someone said, "This nigga from Waffle finna die tonight." Wafflo is a derogatory term used to refer to the South Los gang. Darrell went around a corner to his house and got his backpack. When he came back to the scene, however, Powell and the other members had left. About an hour later, Powell came back alone. He asked Benicia who was standing on the porch of her house and whether she was in the gang or not. When she said no, he left. Minutes later, Powell returned, however. From the house next door, Powell fired a handgun multiple times towards Benicia's house. Darrell was hit in the lung and Benicia was struck in the chest area. The police were called and both juveniles were taken to the hospital. Powell was caught on a next door neighbor's security surveillance night vision camera. The videotape was played for the jury. While in custody, Powell confessed to the shootings to a fellow gang member who was a police informant wearing a riot. A portion of the audio from the conversation was played for the jury. Powell also confessed to the shooting in an audio tape police interview. In the end, due to evidence from several witnesses, the surveillance evidence, and statements from his fellow gang member, the jury found Powell guilty of the attempted willful, deliberate, and premeditated murders of Darrell and Benicia. and the trial court sentenced Powell to a total of 80 years in life in state prison. Yeah, South Los, that's just one gang on a long list of rivals that the H.A. Hoovers have. These niggas are known to go to war with a lot of different factions. Some of the H.A. Hoover's main rivals are the neighborhood Rolling 90 Crips. They also go at it with a lot of other umbrellas as well. Some consist of the Rolling O's and the neighborhood Crips, and other street gangs that associate themselves with the Deuce Card, with the 8-4 Main Street Crips and the 9-8 Main Street Crips. The Hoover criminals and the Main Street Crips actually used to be close allies. However, in 2009, their alliance ended on bad terms at a house party thrown by the Main Street Crips, who invited the Hoover criminals. Allegedly, the Hoovers and the Main Street Crips got into a confrontation over a female, which ended in gunfire. In addition, like already mentioned, they go at it with all East Coast Crips, and even though they find themselves allied with most gangster Crips, they have a past history of beefing with the 8-7 gangster Crips and the 9-7 gangster Crips. They also have a previous history of feuding with the 8-4 Maswan Bloods. But it's one war that forever changed Los Angeles gang politics, and the Hoovers, they were in the middle of it all. Beef with all neighborhood Crips. The beef with all factions of the neighborhood car, particularly the Rolling 60s and the neighborhood Rolling 90s, for the H.A. Hoovers can be traced back to the war with the Rolling 60s and the H.A. Gangsta Crips. The war between these two divided most gangs in Los Angeles. You had to choose a side. The Hoovers in the 60s, they actually used to be real close. They hang out on each other's blocks, fight together, and often function together. But already having close ties with the H.A. Gangsta Crips, the Hoovers decided to move with the Gangsta Crip card. And what started off as just fights quickly escalated to gun battles between the two gangs, and eventually, this grew to an all-out war. This led to several casualties on both sides, and as of today, both gangs still have a bitter hatred toward each other. And unfortunately, Joshua Orlov got a taste of this hatred firsthand after falling victim to a female Hoover member disguised as a neighborhood Crip member. Mona Sanders met Jessica Marie Williams in November of 2007, and Williams often spent the night at Sanders' house. Williams was a member of the H.A. Hoover criminals gang, and her moniker was Grove. She wore jeans and a tank top, she wore hair in braids, and looked like a male. Sanders was associated with the Troubled Gangsta Crips, which is a gang that is friendly with the H.A. Hoovers. While the two were together, Williams purchased a black Chevy Caprice, but the car was registered to Sanders' name because Williams did not have a license. Fast forward to the following year. In the early morning of May 29th of 2008, Williams called Connie Aldridge and asked her to buy some bullets for her. Later that night, Sanders, Aldridge, a man known as Max, and Williams drove the Chevy Caprice to the Big 5 sporting goods store in Inglewood, California. Sanders did not know Max, but saw him with Williams a few times in the past. Aldridge purchased a box of Remington 40 caliber Smith & Wesson bullets and gave them to Williams. Both Sanders and Williams drove the Caprice and usually parked it in front of Sanders' house. Sometimes after the purchase of the bullets and prior to her arrest, Williams asked Sanders to start parking the car in the back of the house. On May 30th of 2008, Joshua Earls was walking from his house towards the corner of 104th Street and South Manhattan Place when an older model black car pulled up right behind him. The car was an old school Caprice or an Impala and looked like an old school cop car. The passenger had braided hair and wore a New York Yankees baseball cap backwards. The passenger then asked Earl, "Where you from?" And as Earl started to back up, the passenger, using a black handgun with brown grips, shot at him. Earl then went away but was struck by 4 bullets and suffered injuries to his chest, right shoulder, and his leg. An officer with the LAPD responded to the scene of the Earl shooting and recovered 10 shell casings. But Grove still wasn't finished. On June 2nd of 2008, Jonathan McKeon was inside his house when he heard a gunshot coming from the intersection of 67th and Vermont Avenue. He looked out the window and saw a person backing up towards a black car and shooting towards Vermont Avenue. The shooter was dressed in a white t-shirt and dark pants and wore a baseball cap backwards. The car was parked under a streetlight and McKeon saw the shooter and another person get into the car and drive westbound on 67th Street past his house. At trial, McKeon testified that he could not tell if the shooter was a male or a female because he only saw the shooter from the side. In a pretrial statement, McKeon told the police that the shooter was a male. On June 2nd of 2008, Carlos Granade was inside his house near 67th Street and Vermont Avenue when he heard approximately 8 gunshots. He went to his front door and heard what sounded like a male voice yell, "Hey, Trey Hoover." He heard 2 cars pass close by and then saw a dark colored sedan speed westbound on 67th Street past his house. Renaud walked to the corner of the block and found 19-year-old Fenton Brown crawling on the ground. He could see gunshot wounds to Brown's arm. He yelled at other people who were gathering at the scene and told them to call 911. Brown told Renaud that he was coming from a liquor store 2 blocks away, and he had been in an altercation with some Blood gang members at the liquor store. LAPD officer Jesse West and his partner were the first to respond to the scene of Brown's shooting. Brown had multiple gunshot wounds to his clothing, and he was saturated in blood. He was having difficulty breathing and asked Officer West, "Am I going to die?" Brown told Officer West he was standing on the corner of 67th Street and Vermont Avenue when 2 African-American males wearing t-shirts approached him and asked, "Where you from?" Brown responded and said he was not from anywhere, or he did not bang. One of the women pulled out a semi-automatic firearm and began shooting at Brown. While he was running, he looked over his shoulder and saw both women fleeing in the direction of a black car. Brown suffered 6 gunshot wounds, and unfortunately, he died 30 minutes later at the hospital. LAPD officer Linda Hertzman processed the crime scene and recovered 10 shell casings. On June 3rd, in 2008, at approximately 6:55 p.m., LAPD officer Nicholas Hartman was patrolling 81st Street near Hoover Avenue, when Officer Hartman saw a woman walking down the street in the opposite direction. The woman quickly noticed, turned into a courtyard, and started walking faster when she looked over her shoulder and saw the police car. When the police officer stopped the car to speak to Williams, she took off running. The officers then gave chase, and Officer Hartman observed Williams tossing a blue steel semi-automatic pistol with brown grips on it from her waistband and throw it over a chain-link fence. Williams was arrested, and the gun, which had 1 fully caliber round in the chamber and 10 in the magazine, was retrieved. At the time of her arrest, Williams was wearing a New York Yankees baseball cap, commonly worn by the neighborhood Crips, a rival gang of the Tray Hoovers. Williams asked Officer Hartman if he liked her nap cap. That term is a derogatory term used to refer to members of the neighborhood Crips gang. In addition, Williams had 3 bags of rock cocaine, a cell phone, and car keys in her pocket. LAPD firearm examiner Rafael Garcia determined that the shell cases recovered from Earl shootings and the shell cases recovered from Brown shootings were fired from the same gun that Williams discarded at the time of her arrest. The prosecution's gang expert, Officer Hartman, testified that he was assigned to the 77th Division Gang Enforcement Detail and he was responsible for the Tray Hoovers gang. He explained that a gang member acquired status within the gang by committing crimes, especially violent crimes. It was dangerous for a gang member to be seen by rival gang members in a rival gang's territory. In gang culture, a mission involved a plan to commit a crime and then the execution of the plan. Driving into a rival gang's territory and shooting someone would be a typical gang mission. This type of crime showed the community that the shooter and his or her gang were dangerous and powerful. Officer Hartman opined that Williams was a member of the Tray Hoovers based off the number of factors: her admitted membership, her gang tattoos, which included 8 on her left tricep and 3rd on her right tricep, as well as fuck on her right shoulder and naps on her left shoulder, and the circumstances of the shootings of her arrest. When asked a hypothetical question based off of the facts of this case, Officer Hartman opined that the shootings were committed for the benefit and association with the criminal street gang. The shootings, they benefited the Tray Hoovers by demonstrating the gang's power over rival gangs and causing fear and intimidation in the community. The area where Earl was shot was claimed by the Rolling Hunters gang, an affiliated neighborhood Crips, which are mortal enemies of the Tray Hoovers. The neighborhood Crips identified with the New York Yankees logo, and the Tray Hoover gang member wear a New York Yankees logo cap so that the shooter could blend in with the surroundings of the Rolling Hunters territory. The east side of the street where Brown was shot was claimed by the 6'5" Menlo Crips, while the west side was claimed by the 6'7" neighborhood Crips. Both gangs were allies of each other and rivals of the Tray Hoovers. Yeah, rest in peace to all parties involved. But trust, the Hoovers have a lot of other members who are known to go to war with everybody. Prominent figures from the set. The Tray Hoovers have a long list of members who have made them one of the most respected and feared in Los Angeles. But doing my research, I found a few Hoover members who are no longer with us. A few of them include Reginald Anthony Brown, also known as Red, who was shot and killed on the 300 block of West 83rd Street over a dispute over a car. It's also Tiny Tray Soja, Trey Star, Big Psycho, Big Calhoun, Juice, Sandman, KT, June, Bay Ray, Chipper, Snake Frog, and Baby Mad Dog. Definitely rest in peace to them You guys let me know in the comments of any members who are no longer with us. Let their names live on. They also have a long list of reputable members who have made the H.O. Hoovers one of the most feared in the city. Some of them include Tray Sojas, Mad Dog, Groove, Desmond McMiller, and Patrick Pearson. When it comes to rappers, they have a few who've been showing out recently. First is Young Threat. Yeah, this nigga has a big bag of different flows. His lyrics paint a vivid picture, and bruh can rap. He's not just bullshitting over a beat. And if you don't believe me, go tap into his YouTube channel and find out for yourself. Also, it's Treyway. Yeah, bro put me in with his classic hooks. If you haven't heard his music, I'm sure you've seen a couple interviews from him, or you seen him online beating up his enemies. Unfortunately, he's doing at least 4 years in prison, so it's free Treyway. That's pretty much it. But y'all let me know if I'm leaving out any other rappers in the comments. Also, if any other members who are no longer with us, if their names live on. Current state of the H.O. Hoover criminals. The H.O. Hoover criminals have been subjected to a lot of gang injunctions and have a lot of prominent members who are either dead or in jail. The Hoovers put a target on their back due to the gang's notorious means of operation. Look, y'all heard a few stories at this point, so it's not hard to imagine the pigs not pressing the Hoovers over the years. But still, when it comes to the H.O. Hoover criminals' current state today, they stand as one of the most active gangs in Los Angeles. Yeah, these niggas were known to terrorize the city from the gang's foundation and are known for the same activities today. Shit, you've heard a few stories, but even those don't scratch the surface on how ruthless this gang is. Not only that though, this gang has grown to the point to where they have subsets in different states as well, including North Carolina, New York, and Oregon.
The Hoover gang has been in Portland for decades, but we wanted to know who are these people, how they've been affecting our community throughout the years.
Today, we're making the community safer.
The state's mission, taking down the Hoover gang one member at a time.
This indictment lays out 3 identified murders, 7 attempted murders, multiple gun seizures, and the trafficking of methamphetamine, heroin, and cocaine.
The Hoovers, born in Los Angeles, have ties throughout the West Coast, some members calling Portland home since the 80s. The U.S. State Attorney announcing 3 of those gang members are now facing federal racketeering and murder charges.
They pride themselves on being everybody killers. EBK standing for that everybody killers, to symbolize their lethality in our community.
The gang has a long history in Portland.
From the onset of their violent initiations to always use force in the form of retaliation and have that cycle unfold in our community.
That retaliation seen in the 2014 murder of Urvea Herring, where 6 Hoover gang members were charged in her death. Court records show the shooting was in retaliation after a fight between the Hoover and Woodland Park Bloods gangs. Herring's mom spoke during the sentencing of one of the men.
Every time he had been in the courtroom, he smirked and smiled. It's like when he was walking in, smiling. He has no remorse for what he had done to me and my family.
Prosecutors say the Hoovers are a large gang and one of the most violent in the city of Portland.
But y'all let me know if I'm leaving out your state, man. Rep for your state. Anyways, that's it for the H.O. Hoover criminals. Y'all got any crazy stories about these guys? Any close calls? Did I miss anything? Did I get anything wrong? Y'all let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that bell if you're doing well. Y'all stay safe and dangerous out there.